opportunity to talk to this particular report. I'd like to thank the committee for the report that it has undertaken on the 2018-29 audit report on government commercial companies and commercial statutory authorities and the other entities. I'd just like to talk very briefly about two of the entities here, in particular on Energy Fiji Limited and Fiji Roads Authority. The Honorable Aseri Randondo was asking earlier on, why is it that EFL is not being audited by the Office of the Auditor General? I think we all know now that EFL is now a private company. There's a shareholding by an investor from overseas, and one of the things that the investors always want is they want their audits on time. They want their audits on time, and this is something that we've been talking about in this House, that in a lot of cases audits are a bit late. Even for the Fiji Roads Authority, for instance, their 1920 and 2021 audits are in progress. For Water Authority of Fiji, 1920 is in progress. For the Ministry of Infrastructure, 1920 and 2021 already in progress. For the Ministry of Lands and Mineral Resources, the 2021 has just been completed. So all of these audits take place sometimes, and sometimes things like EFL get left behind. So that's one of the reasons why these things are happening. But looking at the audit here for EFL, I'm glad to see that it's an unmodified audit. There's no qualification of the audit, so I think that is an achievement. A lot of times, all ministers want to see that CSAs get unqualified audits. It's not the same for FRA. The audit there was qualified, and so that is a concern for us. But just looking at some of the issues that we have here for EFL, where it's talking about the reimbursements from the Department of Energy. This is one of the significant matters that was recommended. OAG recommended that the grants receivable should be recorded in the correct accounting period, and when there's a commitment of payment during the period, to avoid overstatement of assets. The issue at hand there was that there's an invoice of slightly more than 7 million was issued to the Department of Energy in 2019 for various rural electrification schemes. But this was then reversed in 2020 due to non-payment. So because the invoice was only raised to facilitate payment from DOE, but eventually this did not happen, and that did not have any impact on the profit and loss of EFL. So that statement there, that it might have an impact on the statement of the financial position, did not actually happen. The second point that has been made here in relation to EFL was the utilization of rural electrification funding, where the report makes some recommendations for EFL to coordinate with the Rural Electrification Steering Committee. There is a Rural Electrification Steering Committee present, Mr. Speaker, sir, that looks after rural electrification that is done by EFL, which is great extension. This Rural Electrification Steering Committee has representatives from the Ministry of Economy, the Department of Energy, and Energy Fiji Limited. They work hand in hand in a coordinated manner. They meet every 2 months to monitor the progress of rural electrification projects and to make sure of its timely implementation, and they also look at the funding of all the projects. There was also a statement made by the Auditor General's report that the company EFL should work out a strategy to ensure that the entire population had access to electricity by 2021. It's important to make a distinction that is a target of government. That is a target of government to make sure that we have 100% access. EFL is an agent that government would then pay to help to contribute to that target. So it's not the EFL to meet the target, it is government working through EFL, working through the Department of Energy that then works to try to achieve that target. EFL is a public company, limited by shares, is accountable to its stakeholders, of which the government of Fiji is one of the stakeholders. So one of the objectives of the Rural Electrification Steering Committee is to monitor the progress of each rural electrification project. This Rural Electrification Steering Committee, Mr. Speaker, sir, carefully monitors the progress of each rural electrification project, looks at the funding requirements of them, and generally any other issues relating to the timely implementation of rural electrification projects when it meets. It has its key KPIs And further, in the rural electrification contract between EFL and the Department of Energy, there is no approval required from Ministry of Economy for projects that rolls over from year to year, since the Department of Energy and the Ministry of Economy are already members of the Rural Electrification Committee overseeing the project, the progress of each of the projects. The committee reviews the project status of each project, that is work in progress, and as a plan is devised to execute these projects accordingly. There are, of course, some challenges to rural electrification, especially over the past few years. One of these has been the damaging cyclones that we've had. From 2016 to 2020, Fiji has experienced a lot of damaging cyclones, and these have gone to unprecedented level. Tropical Cyclone Winston, which is a Category 5 cyclone, is a good example. It took EFL some 7 to 8 months to complete the cyclone restoration. Not talking about the new projects, just to make sure we could have electricity again in places that had been affected by the cyclone. Cost us $35 million. That $35 million had to be taken out of projects that were already in process. As a result of Tropical Cyclone Winston, EFL could not progress a timely construction and commissioning of some of the rural electrification projects because the repair and maintenance of the damaged power line infrastructure became a national priority. Mr. Speaker, sir, some of the 2020 in particular will go down in the history of EFL as one of the most challenging years it has ever had. Apart from the COVID-19 pandemic, which adversely affected EFL's business, EFL faced other challenges in the form of 4 tropical cyclones. 4 tropical cyclones which struck Fiji in 2020. TC Sarai, Cyclone Tino in February, Cyclone Harold in April, and the year ended with Cyclone Yasa. These cyclones brought with it severe flooding, strong winds that caused widespread damage to the power line infrastructure across the country. Their resources, their employees were put to one of their biggest tests ever. And the cyclone restoration works then became EFL's highest priority, since it was in the national interest. And when these things happen, it has an impact on the projects that were planned for that time. And the impacts of COVID-19 continued in 2021. The second wave of COVID-19 impacted EFL's business and the ability to roll out these rural electrification projects. The impacts of the closure of the international borders, followed by restrictions such as lockdowns, social distancing, and the imposition of curfew on the health and well-being of all Fijians has been challenging. The COVID-19 pandemic affected the timely implementation of rural electrification projects. The third major thing that has been affecting these things is that we have limited electrical contractors and technical employees within the company and in Fiji. And because of that limit, it also has an impact on our ability to be able to progress all of the developments that we have. Some of the other issues that have been brought up with the EFL and with energy has been some issues about, I think it says here, rights of assets resulting from rural electrification scheme. I can now report that this issue has now been addressed by EFL, and the Ministry of Economy and EFL has had a discussion with this, and now they have an agreement in place to make sure that to build a clause in the grid extension projects signed for any rural electrification project between the Ministry of Economy and EFL, so that the assets generated from the rural electrification scheme become part of EFL. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And moving on to Fiji Roads Authority. Fiji Roads Authority, as I mentioned, it had qualified audit opinion. There's 2 issues there in the qualification of the audit opinion. One is in terms of the agreement with municipal councils, which I understand now is being addressed. And the secondly is the issue to do that I had addressed yesterday about the Transport Information Structure project. But FRA management at that time, and I mentioned yesterday, had changed some of the general conditions of the contract, which affected the funding that we had from the World Bank, in which government then had to finish off the SERP program, SERP 1. But as mentioned yesterday, that has now been addressed by FRA. Some of the other issues that have been mentioned there, the absence of documented business continuity and disaster recovery plan. FRA has proven that it has a means of addressing these issues when the disasters do happen. But nevertheless, Policies have been drafted and are yet to be implemented. The work is taking place on the ground. There's some issues with the assets with zero written down values. Some of these assets are not used by the authority, as most of it does not comply with the minimum OHS requirements. Those assets are used to comprise of IT, equipment, furniture, and fittings. Assets are still in a workable condition, but FRA management does review the assets with zero values and determines the best course of action based on the budgetary allocation. Other points that are talked about there is in terms of the redundancy liability account, the issue is resolved. Impairment of debtors that has been mentioned by the Honourable Leawere, the figure there has now been reduced to around 300,000 from the, I can't see the figure was, I think it was over 2 million. That's now been reduced to around 300,000. Proper process is not followed during tender process. The process has been improved and has been updated in the amended operations manual. No clear guidelines to capitalize emergency response work. This has been updated in the amended operation manuals, and all the immediate response activities will be treated similar to maintenance, while permanent reinstatement works will be capitalized. Other issues that have been listed there, the asset disposable policy, depreciation rates for road assets, tenders not called. All these issues have been continued to be addressed by FRA. And as a minister, we look forward to FRA has been implementing some of the things that have been recommended here. And we look forward to an audit that comes in the future where they will have no qualifications on their audits. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir.
I thank the Honourable Minister for his contribution to the debate. I now give the floor to the